courtroom was so silent that even the ticking of the old wooden clock seemed loud. A cold light filtered through the tall windows, painting long shadows across the polished floor. In the center of the room stood a woman whose eyes were swollen from hours of crying. Her name was Laura Bennett, a mother known in her small town for her kindness, her honesty, and the gentle way she cared for her only son, Daniel. Yet on this day, she stood trembling before the law, accused and convicted of a crime that weighed on her soul like a boulder, an impulsive act committed in a moment of desperation, one she regretted every minute since. People whispered from the benches, some shocked, others disappointed, many simply confused by how a woman like Laura had ended up there. But no whisper carried more pain than the silent cry in the eyes of her 10-year-old son. Daniel sat alone, his tiny hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He hadn't slept the night before. He hadn't eaten. All he could think about was the moment the judge would speak the final words that would decide his mother's fate. Behind the great oak bench sat Judge Helena Strauss. She was a woman of strong posture despite the wheelchair she had depended on for years. Her voice was steady, her eyes sharp, and though she was known for her fairness, she carried a heaviness in her heart, the kind only those who suffer in silence understand. Some said her paralysis came from an accident long ago. Others whispered it was a medical mystery. But one thing was certain, no one had ever seen her stand. As she prepared to read the sentence, the courtroom felt frozen in time. Laura shut her eyes, already feeling the weight of the words she feared were coming. Judge Helena inhaled deeply, her voice ready to echo through the chamber. But before she could speak, a soft sound broke through the tension. Tiny footsteps. Daniel stood up. Slowly at first, then with a sudden rush of courage, he ran toward the front of the courtroom. His face was streaked with tears, but his eyes burned with something no one expected to see that day. Faith. Pure, unshakable, childlike faith. "Your Honor." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. Please don't take my mom away." The room gasped. Even Judge Helena froze, taken by surprise. Daniel wiped his tears with the sleeve of his shirt, then looked directly at the judge, straight into her soul. "I know what my mom did was wrong," he said, breathing hard. "But she's good. She's the best person I know. And I can help you. But I need you to help her first." Judge Helena raised an eyebrow, confused. "Help me? With what, young man?" Daniel swallowed, fear trembling through him, but his voice came out firm. "If you let my mom go, I will pray for you. I will ask God to make you walk again." A gasp rippled through the courtroom like a sudden wind. The judge froze. Laura felt her legs weaken, and Daniel stood there, small, fragile, shaking, but glowing with a faith strong enough to shake the walls around them. The courtroom, once rigid and formal, suddenly felt like holy ground. Judge Helena blinked, stunned, unable to form words. For a moment, the entire room was suspended between reason and something much greater, a possibility that no one dared expect. And as silence settled again, something began to stir. Something that no one yet understood, but which would soon change everything. Judge Helena's breath caught in her chest. For the first time in her long career, she felt truly unprepared. She had presided over the most difficult cases imaginable, violent crimes, heartbreaking family disputes, tragedies that left entire communities shaken. But nothing had ever pierced her armor the way this small boy's words just had. Daniel stood in front of her, trembling, his hands balled at his sides as if holding on to the last thread of hope he had left in the world. His mother, Laura, had fallen to her knees behind him, as if her son's bravery had pulled the ground out from beneath her. Tears streamed down her face, not from fear anymore, but from something deeper, shame mixed with awe. "Daniel," Judge Helena finally whispered, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard inside a courtroom. "You don't understand how the law works." I do." Daniel interrupted, and his voice, though small, carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers. I know she did something wrong. I know there are consequences. But I also know that God can change things. God can fix things, even things everyone thinks are impossible. A murmur spread across the courtroom, but no one dared to stand or speak. It was as if every person present was witnessing something sacred. Judge Helena tried to keep her expression neutral, but her eyes betrayed something. Pain, disbelief, longing. Her fingers tapped the armrest of her wheelchair unconsciously, a small habit she had developed over the years to hide how much she hated being confined to it. She had prayed. Once, long ago. She had believed once. But time, disappointment, and unanswered hopes had slowly eroded her faith. And yet here stood a boy who had no reason to trust the world anymore, trusting still. "Why would you think you could help me walk again?" she asked, trying to maintain control of the moment. Daniel bit his lips, looking as fragile as a single flame in the wind. Because I've been praying," he said, "for a long time. Every night I ask God to help you. I saw you once. At another hearing with my mom. I didn't even know your name, but I asked God to make you walk again someday." Judge Helena blinked. Her throat tightened. She remembered that day. She had noticed a little boy looking at her from the corner of the room, eyes full of curiosity and something close to pity. She had quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. She thought it ended there. But this child had carried her in his prayers without her ever knowing. Daniel took another step toward her. "If you let my mom go, I'll pray right now. I'll ask God to make a miracle. I'll ask him to help you stand up." Laura sobbed behind him. "Daniel, please, don't." But Judge Helena lifted a hand to silence her. Everyone's heart beat in unison. Not a breath dared to break the tension. The judge stared at Daniel with eyes that had seen decades of human suffering, but also quiet resilience. Something inside her began to tremble. Not fear, not physical weakness, but something spiritual, something she had buried for years. "Do you really believe," she whispered slowly, "that a miracle could happen? Right here, right now?" Daniel nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I believe God can do anything." Helena's lips parted, but no words came out. Her mind raced with logic, with rules, with law, yet her heart felt something entirely different. A warmth she hadn't felt since she was a child kneeling beside her grandmother's bed, learning how to pray for the first time. The boy's faith was waking something inside her. Finally, as if surrendering to a force greater than herself, Judge Helena looked at Laura. "Mrs. Bennett, your crime was serious. It hurt people. It endangered lives." Her voice was steady again, but filled with emotion. "But I also see repentance. I see a mother who would give anything, even her freedom, to protect her child." Laura bowed her head, sobbing uncontrollably. "And I see a boy," Helena continued, her voice tightening, "whose faith could move mountains." Daniel took a sharp breath, his heart pounding in his ears. Judge Helena slowly placed both hands on the armrests of her wheelchair. "Before I deliver my sentence, I want to know something." She leaned forward, meeting Daniel's eyes with an intensity that made the room feel even smaller. "If I gave your mother another chance," she asked, "would you be willing to pray for me, with all your faith, right here in this courtroom?" Daniel's breath hitched. Everyone leaned forward, and with a single nod, the boy whispered, "Yes, I will." The judge's next words would determine not only Laura's fate, but would set the stage for something no one in that courtroom would ever forget. The air inside the courtroom seemed to thicken as Daniel gave his answer. It was as if time itself hesitated, unsure whether to move forward or hold still for what was about to unfold. Judge Helena Strauss, a woman shaped by loss, responsibility, and years of silent suffering, closed her eyes for a moment, gathering courage she did not know she still had. When she opened them again, something in her face had changed. Not authority, not sternness, but vulnerability. "Daniel," she said softly, "come closer." Slowly, the boy stepped until he stood directly in front of her wheelchair. His heart pounded so loudly that he felt it echo in his ears, but he kept his gaze steady. He wasn't afraid, not of her, not of the courtroom, not even of what he was about to ask God to do. Children believe in miracles without needing explanations. And on that day, Daniel's faith was brighter than every light in the room. Judge Helena clasped her hands in front of her. It felt strange, almost unfamiliar to position her fingers the way she once did when she prayed as a little girl. Memories came rushing back. Her grandmother's voice reading psalms. Evenings spent asking God for healing when doctors gave her no answers. Nights she cried alone after realizing she would never stand again. She had given up hope long ago, burying it beneath the weight of reality. And yet here stood a boy inviting her to believe again. "Before you pray," the judge said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something." Daniel looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "I didn't stop walking because of an accident," Helena whispered. The courtroom leaned closer, ears desperate for every word. "It was an illness, a rare one. The doctors told me my spine would never recover. They said I would never feel the strength in my legs again." She paused, swallowing hard. "And for years I accepted that. I accepted the wheelchair. I accepted the pain. I accepted that God had turned away from me." A murmur of sympathy passed through the room. "But today," Helena continued, her eyes glistening, "your faith made me wonder if I was the one who turned away from him." DL felt a shiver run through him, not of fear, but of something he had never felt so strongly before. Purpose. As if he had been brought to this courtroom not just to save his mother, but to awaken something inside this woman. "Your Honor," Daniel whispered, "God didn't forget you." The judge inhaled sharply, as if those simple words pierced straight into her soul. Silence surrounded them like a protective shell. Then, slowly, Daniel reached out his small hand. "Can I pray for you now?" Helena stared at his hand. Tiny, trembling, full of hope. Her own hand hovered in the air for a moment, wavering between disbelief and the desperate desire to trust again. Tears slipped down her cheeks silently as she finally placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold, but within seconds Daniel's warmth surrounded them. Laura watched everything from behind, her tears falling freely, her heart aching with a mixture of fear, gratitude, and awe. She had always believed her son carried something special in him, something gentle, something pure, something that made him see the world differently, but she had never imagined this. All eyes in the courtroom were locked on the tiny boy and the judge whose life had been shaped by tragedy. No one whispered now. No one shifted in their seat. Every person felt as if they were witnessing something sacred, something fragile, something bigger than justice. Daniel closed his eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his voice, soft yet filled with remarkable conviction, rose in the silence. "God, please hear me." A collective shiver moved through the room. "Please help Judge Helena. Please give strength back to her. Legs, make her walk again, not for me, not because I asked, but because you love her, and she needs to know you never left her. Please, God, show her your power. Right now, right here." His voice broke, but the faith in it never wavered. "Please, help her stand." As Daniel finished, a strange stillness settled over the courtroom, deeper than silence, almost like the pause before a storm or the breath before a revelation. Judge Helena's eyes flickered open, glistening with tears and uncertainty. She didn't know what she expected. She didn't know what would happen. But she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Warmth, like a spark. A small flicker awakening inside her legs, something she thought had died forever. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around Daniel's hand, and with trembling lips she whispered, I felt something." Gasps erupted across the room. Daniel opened his eyes, Laura covered her mouth. The moment Judge Helena whispered those words, I felt something. The entire courtroom seemed to gasp in unison. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was a single, trembling breath shared by dozens of people witnessing the first crack of the supernatural in an ordinary room of law and justice. Helena stared down at her legs, almost afraid to blink, afraid the sensation would disappear like a dream dissolving at dawn. Her hands trembled, her heart raced with a mix of fear and hope, two emotions she had spent years trying to separate, yet here they were, tangled, together inside her chest. Daniel didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply held her hand tighter, as if anchoring her to the moment God had chosen. Laura, still kneeling behind her son, felt her entire body weaken. She pressed her hands to her face, whispering through sobs she could no longer contain. She had prayed for deliverance, for mercy, for forgiveness, but she had never expected the miracle to come like this. Judge Helena closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the warmth settle deeper into her legs. It wasn't pain, it wasn't discomfort, it was life. A tingling like the first spark waking inside a dormant flame. She didn't dare move, not yet. She wasn't ready to challenge the impossible. Not until she understood it. Daniel, she whispered, her voice shaking so much she barely recognized it. What do I do? The boy looked up at her, his small face illuminated by a peace that didn't seem human. Trust, he said simply. Just trust. It was such a small word, so fragile, so easy to say, so hard to live. But something in the way he said it made it feel like a command from heaven itself. Helena tried to breathe deeply, but each inhale was sharp, uneven. She had spent years hiding behind logic, behind medical reports, behind the cold certainty that her condition had no cure. Standing up had become a fairy tale, something meant for others, never for her. Yet now, she placed her hands more firmly on the armrests of her wheelchair. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The warmth in her legs grew stronger. It crawled upward, spreading like sunlight thawing frozen ground. Every pair of eyes in the courtroom tracked her movements. Is she going to? Someone whispered. Is this real? Another murmured. Don't move, a trembling voice said. No one knew if it was out of caution or awe, but Helena wasn't listening to any of them. She was listening to her own heart, a heart that hadn't dared believe in a miracle for so long. Her fingers tightened against the chair. Daniel. She whispered again, terrified and hopeful. Stay with me. I'm here, he said. Slowly, painfully, Helena shifted her weight forward. Her arms shook violently. Her breath hitched. Then, a sound. A soft, tiny creak. Her shoes, touching the floor as if they hadn't touched it in years. Another gasp rippled through the courtroom, louder this time. Helena froze. Her eyes widened. She could feel the ground, the cold tiles beneath her feet, the pressure, the weight. Her legs were holding something. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She had forgotten what it felt like. The connection between her body and the earth, the sensation of gravity flowing through her bones, the incredible, profound awareness of standing potential. God, she breathed. God, is this real? Daniel squeezed her hand even tighter. Yes, don't stop. But she was terrified to continue, terrified to fall, terrified to break the moment, terrified to discover it was all a mistake, but even more terrified to never know if she could rise. Laura, her voice cracking, whispered from behind her hands, Please, please let this be true. Judge Helena's muscles quivered as she pushed harder against the armrests. Her shoulders trembled, her legs twitched. Then, for the first time in more than a decade, one knee unlocked. A shock of pure emotion surged through her, and she let out a cry, half pain, half overwhelming hope. The courtroom exploded into sobs, gasps, prayers whispered under trembling breaths. Your Honor, someone exclaimed. Is she actually standing. But she wasn't fully upright yet. She hovered there, caught between the world she had always known and the miracle she was stepping into. Daniel steadied her by placing his small hand over hers. "You're not alone," he whispered. "God is holding you." With that, Helena gathered every remaining shred of courage. Years of disappointment, years of silent nights, years of resignation, and pushed up one more time. Her legs trembled violently. Her breath shattered. The wheelchair creaked behind her, and then her body lifted. Slowly, uncertainly, miraculously. Judge Helena Strauss stood. She stood, for the first time in years, and the courtroom erupted, not in chaos, not in shouts, but in a wave of holy silence. A silence so powerful, so thick with awe, that it felt as if heaven itself had stepped into the room. Helena covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as she looked down at her legs, legs that held her, trembling but alive. Daniel stared up at her with tears of joy spilling down his cheeks, and Laura collapsed into her hands, overwhelmed by the miracle unfolding before her eyes. The impossible had happened. But what this miracle meant, for the judge, for the mother, and for the boy whose faith moved mountains, was only just beginning. Judge Helena stood there trembling from head to toe, her hands covering her mouth as if trying to hold back years of disbelief that were now overflowing in tears. Her legs shook beneath her, uncertain and weak but undeniably alive. Every breath she took was ragged, almost frightened, as though she feared that if she exhaled too strongly, the miracle might vanish. But it didn't vanish. It only grew stronger. Daniel stared up at her as if watching the sky split open. His heart pounded with so much joy that he felt weightless, like he might float right off the courtroom floor. His hand was still wrapped around hers, small fingers gripping a miracle. Behind him, Laura could no longer contain herself. She pressed both hands to her face, sobbing so violently that her shoulders trembled. She had prayed for mercy for her own life. But God had answered by healing someone else in front of her eyes. That alone broke her heart open in a way she had never imagined. Everyone in the courtroom had forgotten the trial, the accusations, the procedures, the law. They were no longer witnesses to a judgment. They were witnesses to a resurrection of hope. Judge Helena dropped her hands slowly, her fingers shaking as they brushed away tears. She looked down at Daniel, her eyes shining with a mixture of bewilderment, awe, and gratitude so deep it cut through every wall she had built around her heart. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. How did you know?" He sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I didn't know," he admitted softly. "I just believed." Belief, that small, fragile thing she had thrown away years ago, now revived through the faith of a child. Helena's knees wobbled and the bailiff rushed forward, terrified she might fall, but she raised one hand to stop him. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Let me stand, please." She closed her eyes, letting the strength build in her legs again, feeling each muscle come alive under her weight. For the first time in years, she was standing under her own power. "Mrs. Bennet," she said suddenly, turning to Laura. Laura swallowed hard, still kneeling, afraid to even lift her eyes. The judge stepped forward, one slow step, then another, each movement like a small victory echoing through the courtroom. With every step she took toward Laura, the gasps grew louder, softer sobs filled the air, and hands covered trembling mouths. When she finally reached her, Judge Helena extended her hand. Laura stared at it, stunned. "Stand up," Helena said gently. Laura rose slowly, her face wet with tears, her body shaking. She looked like a woman expecting punishment, but receiving something she never imagined. The judge placed her hands on Laura's shoulders. "You made a mistake," Helena began, her voice soft but firm. "You broke the law, and the law demands responsibility." Laura nodded, weeping. "But today," the judge continued, her voice trembling with emotion, I witnessed something far greater than a crime. I witnessed redemption. A murmur swept the room. Helena inhaled deeply, her newly strengthened legs holding steady beneath her. I saw a woman who regrets what she did, a woman who loves her son more than she loves her own life. And I saw a child whose faith reminded me that justice without compassion is incomplete. She wiped a tear from her cheek. I cannot ignore what happened here today. Not the miracle, not the faith, not the confession of a repentant mother. Judge Helena stepped back slightly, lifted her chin, and with a voice that echoed through every corner of the courthouse, she declared, I hereby suspend the sentence. Mrs. Bennett, you are free. Laura collapsed forward, crying into her hands, unable to believe what she had heard. Daniel ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist as she hugged him tightly, desperately, as though she never intended to let go again. But the miracle wasn't finished yet. Judge Helena approached Daniel once more, lowering herself to a knee, not out of weakness, but out of gratitude. Tears streamed down her face as she took his hands in hers. You saved more than your mother today, she whispered. You saved me. Daniel shook his head. I didn't do anything. You brought back my faith, Helena said, her voice cracking. You reminded me that God still moves, even when we stop believing. The boy smiled softly. He never stopped loving you. The judge broke into tears again and pulled Daniel into a tight embrace. The boy clung to her, the courtroom silent except for the sound of people sobbing, praying, whispering words of awe. When she finally stood again, tall, steady, strong, the entire room rose with her. People began to applaud, some quietly, some loudly, all overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. But Judge Helena raised a hand, silencing them. There is something everyone should understand, she said. Miracles are not given to the deserving. They are given to the willing. She looked at Daniel. And today a child was willing to believe when all of us had forgotten how. Laura and Daniel held each other tightly, tears flowing freely down their faces. Judge Helena truly walked, back to her bench, each step echoing with new purpose and new life. She looked down at her hands, then at the small boy whose faith had changed everything. And with a trembling voice, she said something no one in that courtroom would ever forget. This courtroom has witnessed justice, but today we witnessed a miracle.